Hi, welcome back to the Consciousness Formula. This is part 2. I'm Dave Blumhorst. I'm the host for this podcast and lifelong student of consciousness. Basically, I was born with the question in my head, who am I? And I have been pursuing it ever since. You can find more on my background on the podcast intro, the webpage, all that kind of stuff. But let's talk about the consciousness formulas. This is part 2. Let's review what the 4 statements are. So I've posited this as a way of looking at consciousness. And to review, and it's kind of an audacious one that I'm trying to explore here. So first, you are the subject of your experience, or you are the subject, you are subjectivity. You can look at it that way. Second, subjectivity, which is consciousness, is universal. Third, therefore, you are universal consciousness. And fourth, all else is content. Science seems to think there's a physical universe, and we've analyzed that physical universe, and we reduce it to atoms and quantum subatomic particles and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to believe science, and that's where we really need to go with science. Let's take a look at that. And I'm actually going to take it from the point of view of philosophy, because philosophy takes in this science and creates a metaphysical view of the world based on that science. In philosophy, the philosopher of consciousness that coined how to look at this is a guy named David Chalmers. And he came up with what's called the hard problem of consciousness. And he said the easy problems are things like, there's brain activity that causes us to see things, hear things, we filter that. We create images, all that kind of stuff, right? Brain activity is the easy part. And I think that a lot of neuroscientists would say, that's not easy. We've been mapping that for decades. We have a long way to go. But to him, the hard problem is, why are the lights on? Why is there a felt experience at all? Philosopher Thomas Nagel put it as, why is it that there is something it is like to be a bat? Why is it there is something it is like to be a human? We could just as easily be androids running around, looking everything like human, acting like humans, emoting like humans, all based on programming, and we would have no felt experience at all. So why is there a felt experience? That's the hard problem of consciousness. And it breaks down into 3 philosophies, if you will, 3 big branches of philosophy. Materialism, which is the dominant view still today, panpsychism, and idealism. Materialism is the dominant view because science is the dominant view. And science says everything can be reduced to physical processes. And it also would basically say, if you know all the initial conditions of the universe, you can predict exactly where things are going. Because everything is deterministic, everything is cause and effect, everything is caused by physical processes. What's illusion? What's consciousness then? Daniel Dennett, one of the foremost modern philosophers, he only passed away recently, of materialism, put it as consciousness is a brain-generated illusion. So there's all this stuff going on in our brain, and all these processes going on in our brain, and we need to be able to make sense of that to live in the world. So we generate this view, and we call it consciousness, and we feel it and experience it that way. So that's how he approaches consciousness. There isn't really a hard problem. Consciousness is just an illusion that is helpful evolutionarily to stitch the world together that we see through our senses and the like. But there's some holes in this that we've uncovered, particularly recently. So one of those holes is, how could consciousness, this felt sense of being, this qualitative experience, as opposed to quantitative. Science measures all sorts of quantitative stuff. But the being able to see red, right? I could describe for you the Pantone color palette that goes into making red. I could give you the light frequency that we see that is red. But that doesn't give you an experience of redness. And we have an experience of redness. There's a famous thought experiment on this. Mary, a scientist, is put into a building, if you will, that is all black and white. And she has never seen any colors at all, yet she has studied them. She knows that an apple is red based on these frequencies, these color mixes, etc. If you take her out of that building and now show her an apple, the experience is totally different. Even though she knows everything about the color red, she had no idea what the experience was like until she saw the red apple. Why is there an experience of redness? And since that's qualitative, not quantitative, how do you get there from all the physical stuff? How does physical stuff generate something that is not physical, which is that felt experience? That's one hole in the whole idea of materialism. Another one is we have seen that there are a lot of behavioral processes that precede our conscious experience. So when we react to something, especially something like fear, something's about to attack, and we think later, oh, I saw the lion attack, so I decided to jump out of the way or climb the tree. Actually, neuroscientists have looked at the pathways, looked at how those things happen in real time, and realized that you have started to jump or move or whatever long before it hits your conscious awareness. These things are happening without conscious awareness. If you had to have conscious awareness to make those decisions, you would be dead because you would not have the time to get away from that lion. So behavioral processes that actually save us and help us evolutionarily actually precede conscious awareness. So in a sense, this is to say that this conscious experience is not an evolutionary advantage. Someone that dug into this is Annaka Harris. She has a great audio documentary called Lights On. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, what have you. I loved it because she starts as a materialist and starts poking at the holes in materialism and ends up coming to the conclusion that consciousness is fundamental and one. And so to watch her go through that journey is amazing. But part of it, and you should know that she's married to Sam Harris, who is a neuroscientist. Part of it is she realized that this felt experience, the qualia of experience, really isn't the evolutionary advantage that materialists make it to be. And she went from there. We also tend to think, and Annaka Harris talks about this in that audio documentary as well, that consciousness must be complex. It arises from the complexity of the stuff going on in our brain. That's the Dennett thing, right? That consciousness is a brain-generated illusion. And she kind of comes back in that and says, the only reason we think that is the only species we know that can report on their conscious experience is humans. And we report on our conscious experience to each other. Just because we're the only ones that report on it doesn't mean we're the only ones that have it. Bit of a fallacy to think that way. And so she also sees that. Other problems in it? In physics, and we've had this for over 100 years now, we have something called the measurement problem. Back at the dawn of quantum mechanics, someone ran an experiment. They wanted to see if light was quanta, particles, or was it a wave? And so they started firing photons, firing light through a barrier that had two slits in it. And then the light would hit a screen behind the two slits. And they said, we're going to see probably a scatter pattern, just random dots on the screen where all the photons hit, because we think light is actually photons, quantized photons. The whole idea of quantum mechanics is to quantize things. And so they fired this at the two slits, and they got an interference pattern, not a scatter pattern. An interference pattern is what you get with waves. Think about you drop a pebble in a pond, you drop another pebble in a pond, and when those waves meet, some of them cancel each other out, and you get this kind of on-off pattern. That's an interference pattern. They went, oh, light's a wave. Interesting. Well, if I put a measurement device at those slits to see, as the light goes through, which slit does it go through? what do I find? Why I'm trying to understand why this is a wave, so let's go look at the slits themselves. So they put a measurement device so they could observe what was going through the slits. And when they did that, they got a scatter pattern on the screen. It stopped being a wave. It started being particles. And they're like, so you mean how I plan to measure this, whether I observe the slits or don't observe the slits, affects the outcome of the experiment? Light's only particles when I look at it, and when I don't, it's waves? How does that work? Why is it that to go from a wave to particles, I have to make an observation? It became known as the observer problem or the measurement problem. It's been solved many different ways in science that are all kind of unsatisfactory. The initial implication that a number of those early pioneers, like say an Erwin Schrödinger, who came up with the wave function formula, was that the observer is no longer a bystander with a third-party objective view on a physical universe. The observer is participating in the results of this experiment. So observers became participatory instead of just stand back observation. And that caused a lot of problems in the whole materialistic paradigm. Other holes in the materialistic paradigm, I talked about near-death experiences. And neuroscientists and other scientists like to dismiss this as just the hallucinations in the brain from a dying brain, what happens when oxygen leaves the brain. But as I said, they have a lot in common with each other. And some of them have reported events happening outside the room they're in while they're in the room, theoretically dead. I think the scientists that say it's just a hallucination like to ignore that part. No, we see some of them here. They're reporting what's going on from inside the room and what's happening to them. And it's all just a big hallucination. And part of what they do is, there's an interesting twist. Scientists actually saying, all the evidence you have for that doesn't matter because it breaks the laws of physics. And so we know the laws of physics, and so you may have all sorts of evidence there. We're just going to throw it out because it breaks the laws of physics. You would think they'd start thinking, maybe we need to change the laws of physics to accommodate this. The other thing that falls into this category is what we used to call, and a lot of people still call woo-woo, which we'll call paranormal experiences or psi phenomena. Telepathy, telekinetics, things like that. Before the scientific revolution, most everyone believed in these things. They thought, I can think and transmit something to another person, maybe not reliably, but I can do that. They believed that people could actually manipulate objects. There was a famous modern person, Edgar Cayce, who you could see film of him bending a spoon with his mind, telekinetics in that case. There is an Institute of Noetic Studies, IONS, with a head researcher named Dean Radin, who decided, let's put this stuff to the test. Let's move this into the laboratory and see if there's any there to this stuff. And they found that there is. It's not huge effects. So things like being able to control things, telekinetics. They use something called random number generators. And theoretically, with random number generators, they are truly random. And they asked people to meditate and focus on changing that randomness to either a positive or a negative off of what the average would be. And they got effects for like in the 56, 57% range. As he put it, they are like 1,000,000 to 1 effects that show that this phenomena is really happening. Again, a lot of materialists will just dismiss that and say it can't be. It's against the laws of physics. But I think he throws them up there and says, okay, you say it's against the laws of physics, but here's the actual evidence, lab-controlled evidence that this works. What are you going to do with that? You got to explain it somehow then with your laws of physics. And they just tend to throw it out. Now, he has a new book out recently, The Science of Magic, which is kind of interesting. The first part of it goes into all the details of the research on these various psi phenomenon. It's absolutely fascinating, including stories of a guy he has peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals, and one of the reviewers who reviewed his work looked at it And his comment was, I have to accept this into the journal for peer review. All the processes of the experiments, including the double blinds and the controls, are done exactly like we would demand of any other scientific experiment, and the results show a positive effect far enough that we have to accept them. He said, I can't really accept it in my brain that this is true, but I have to accept it into the journal because he did everything right. So another hole in materialism. So what do we do if the world isn't just this physical place, like the materialists say? The next thing up is something called panpsychism. Panpsychism says consciousness is a fundamental property. It does not say there's only consciousness. It says consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, just like matter is a fundamental property of the universe, and the two interact, but consciousness is something separate. Philip Goff is probably the foremost proponent of panpsychism today. He has a good book on this out, Galileo's Mistake. And he said Galileo's basic mistake, and actually it wasn't a mistake. Galileo knew what he was doing. Galileo basically said, I know the stuff I can measure. I can't measure what's going on in the mind. I can't measure all this mind stuff, God stuff, whatever you have out there. But I know how to measure what's going on in the physical world, so I'm going to focus there. Somehow that got interpreted into all this other stuff doesn't exist. I'm just going to, the world is physical and it's material because that's what we can study and that's what we can reliably study and figure out. Descartes is the one philosopher that actually split it in two, into there is the physical stuff and there is the divine and there is the mind. It's what we call duality now, a dualism approach. We've got both mind, we've got the physical. Goff says this is a fundamental error. We need to bring the two back together, put mind and matter back together. And one way of doing that is saying everything is conscious. It's not the same as consciousness is one. It's everything is conscious. So consciousness is its own fundamental property that is inherent in all matter in the universe, from our humanness to a rock. There is something it is like to be a rock, even if it is very dim and we could not measure it. There is still consciousness there. There's something it is like to be a rock. There's some issues with this. If everything has a little hint of consciousness in it, how do you combine all those hints up to form a complex consciousness like the human? Something that they have to grapple with. So, in a sense, they're saying consciousness is a property of everything. You combine it up and you get more collective or universal forms of consciousness. I'm going to talk a little bit about physicists here and how they look at it. I mentioned Schrodinger. He did a paper called What is Life? And he's done other things like that. But he really grappled with the implications of quantum mechanics. If our observations have an effect on our results, have an effect on our reality, if our observations are in a sense what creates reality, why don't we all just see a different reality? We all see one reality. Why is that? And he actually brought it down to one solution, which is that, we must all be one mind, just filtering through all us different individuals, but really there's only one mind behind it. And the thing he actually said was the number of minds in the universe is one. And that for him solved the measurement problem and got away from other ways of solving the measurement problem. You've probably heard of the many worlds theory, which is that every time you make a decision, the universe splits off into two universes and more universes and more universes, and there's a universe everywhere. There's a universe somewhere for everything that could have possibly occurred, and they all exist. This was popularized in the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, where you see all these multiverses that people are traveling between. But A lot of people are saying, yeah, that theoretically works, but what a stretch. What kind of cost are you paying to not have to say that consciousness is a part of this and that observation actually helps create reality by going all the way to we must have infinite universes that branch out at every split? That is just like, okay, I will not accept that the observer actually causes anything. Therefore, I'm going to come up with some wild theory that actually makes that not happen. A lot of people have accepted it. The other thought there, though, is, but we had the Big Bang. We have all this stuff that happens long before there are any conscious beings. In panpsychism, that wouldn't matter because everything is conscious. So you've got observations happening all the time, collapsing the wave function, as we call it, and creating the universe that we see. The other thing to know in quantum physics is when you collapse the wave function to create a result, all prior events that are needed to create that result are also collapsed to create that that result. Think of the universe then as kind of a quantum soup with this bubbling of probabilities and possibilities. And when we make an observation, a part of that solidifies and we see it. And so that means that when we make an observation, it actually collapses the wave function backward in time, or what we would view as backward in time, because we only travel time one direction. In quantum mechanics, there's no arrow of time. It doesn't only flow one way, it can flow both ways. And so these formulas work whether you go forward or backward in time. And so the collapse of the wave function, the creating of the particle instead of the wave, can actually create the events necessary as its cause going back in time. Physicist John Wheeler, Nobel Prize winner, theoretical physicist, he put this in a very striking way about how consciousness could be fundamental here. And he actually thinks of information as fundamental. He called it getting it from bit, getting the things of the universe from the information of the universe. But he has a quote that I love on this, and I don't have it exactly, but I'll paraphrase it here. It matters not that the first observer came along billions of years later. So the universe was created by observation. It matters not that the first observer came along billions of years later, because that first observer collapsed the wave function all the way back to the Big Bang. That's a lot. I've gone through the mystics and the religions of why we are universal, philosophies of materialism and panpsychism. I haven't yet gotten into the philosophy of idealism, which is that consciousness is the only fundamental. But while Schrodinger said the number of minds in the universe is one, it doesn't mean the universe isn't there. It just means there's only one mind looking at it and making an observation. Idealism will take this a step further and say, actually, everything is consciousness. The physical world is an illusion. We will get into that in the fourth statement, the all else is content, but you can see where that is going. For now, I wanted to take this part of it and show you that the individual consciousness is not what we're shooting for here. Consciousness may well be universal in nature, and our individuality is what is an illusion here. And how do we know that? That gets into the third statement. Therefore, you are universal consciousness. And this one doesn't take a long time, and we've hinted at a lot of the reasons for this. Logic-wise, it makes sense, right? I am the subject. Subject consciousness is universal. If the subject consciousness is universal, I must be universal. That's just a logical following. So what is this individual then? Because we really feel that. We live that every day. If I am the subject and the subject is universal, why do I feel this individuality? What kind of an illusion is this? Well, we've already hinted at some of it. The individual that we feel is a construction. We construct it with our default mode network. We create the story of who we are. I can tell you that if you were to look back at who you were as a child, and I'm like mid-60s now, but looking back at my 5-year-old self and my mid-60s self, there isn't an atom in my body that is the same. It's all changed. Matter of fact, almost all the cells, except for a few neurons, are different. Cells die, cells get cells die, cells create. That's how the process of living happens. There is nothing physically about me that is the same as I was as a child. So the idea of we have a physical continuity, not really. We have this feeling of who we are because we have memories, but those memories aren't stored in our brain like you think of storing memory in a computer or something. It's not recorded bits, it's interpretive bits. The way memories form are based on emotional charge. And there's an evolutionary reason for that. I need to remember where to find food. If I know that there's a grove of apples over there, I need to know that. If I need to know, where I can best hunt, deer and the like, I need to know that. There are things that are important. And if you look at the hundreds of thousands of inputs we get into our brain through our senses all the time, we have to filter that into something that actually works for us, that allows us to survive and thrive, throwing out over 90% of it to focus on the part that matters. And so those parts that matter become our memories. And our memories, when they look at how we retrieve a memory, it's not retrieved from, I got this memory in this part and this memory in this part. When we retrieve a memory, the whole brain circuitry relights up that lit up when we first had the experience. We're literally recreating that experience in our brain. And every time we recreate it in our brain and refire off those neurons, it's rewritten back in there. It changes every time we access a memory. So if we're relying on our memories to tell us who we are, I got news for you. Those change too. And those are filtered, and those are based on who you think you want to be and who you need to be to survive. So you are constructing a story of yourself based on filtered memories, which are based on filtered experiences, based on a body that is not the same from day to day and year to year. So, this individuality we experience is actually a construction we make and not who we are. So how could we get from universal consciousness to individual consciousness? There's an idealist philosopher named Bernardo Kastrup. He has a philosophy called analytic idealism, but he came up with an interesting way to look at this. He thinks of individuals as alters of universal consciousness. To understand an alter, think of a person who has multiple personality disorder. This is a disorder where, and you've seen it popularized in sometimes, where, I'm Mary at this point in time, and suddenly another personality comes in, and I'm someone else entirely, with a different set of viewpoints, a different experience of the world. We've called it schizophrenia, but really multiple personality disorder is a great way to look at it. And they've studied multiple personalities, and they have found that when one person is occupying the body, that's that person. When the other person, which they call an alter, is occupying the body, that's that person, and they don't know about each other. Even though they're in the same body, they temporarily are there at different times. They don't know about each other. They don't have each other's memories. They don't experience what the other experiences. And really, for some wild effects, there are a couple of they've studied where one of the alters, so an alter is one of the personalities, one of the alters is blind. And they can measure through the brain waves and fMRI that they are blind. Then the other alter comes in and they can see. All the circuitry starts working that lets them see. So these alters can have very different experiences of the world. So you're talking really one brain, one mind, split into two different personalities that are totally walled off from each other. Bernardo is basically positing that in a more positive functional way, we are alters of the one mind, that there is one universal consciousness, and we are all alters of that universal consciousness. What happens when we die? That alter goes away, and we are part of the one again. So what happens in a person with multiple personality disorder if they actually cure it? Because it does happen. They get cured. And when that happens, you don't find that one alter goes away and there's a surviving alter. They get combined. Now the new person has all the memories and all the experiences of however many alters they had going before. It gets recombined. So he's proposing that we are alters of this one consciousness. It's an interesting way to look at it. I'm going to look at another way of thinking your universal consciousness. Now, this one first occurred to me after my own awakening experience in 2011. And someone said, how would you describe it? And I said, look at it this way. You have a big opaque ball. And that ball has a light in the center of it. And it's got pinpricks in the surface of that ball. Billions of pinpricks in the surface of that ball. That light is now shining through all those billions of pinpricks. So there's one light looking outside the ball with all these different pinpricks of light. Now let's start putting filters on those pinpricks of light. Red filter, blue filter, green filter, whatever. And now all those filters of light look different. Now the pinprick holes start mistaking themselves for the actual light. I'm the purple-green light. I'm the blue-red light. I'm the chartreuse light. I'm the fuchsia light, right? They're really the light. The light is at the center of the ball. It just happens to be getting filtered through all these different pinprick holes. Our body minds are the pinprick holes through which our consciousness, which is light, is being filtered. We are not the pinprick holes. We are the light at the center of that ball. That's who we really are. We're not individuals. We are the universal consciousness flowing through all those pinprick holes. Common analogy in mysticism is the ocean and waves. You see all sorts of individual waves on an ocean, but the waves are the ocean. They can't exist without the ocean. They are an activity of the ocean. If a wave starts saying, I'm my own thing, I'm independent of everything, I'm just a wave, and then they crash on the shore, they're gone. But really they're just water, and they're going back into the ocean. There's one ocean producing lots and lots of waves, and those waves are the activity of the ocean. In that sense, our individual consciousnesses, I don't want to call them individual consciousnesses. Consciousness is one. Our individuality is an activity of consciousness, just like waves are an activity of ocean. And consciousness is actually an activity, not a thing, not a noun. So, a couple of different ways of looking at that, but I think you get the point that this individuality we feel is not so solid as it seems. It's really a construction. Well, and by the way, this is not something that is held just by mystics and philosophers. This also say this. They say that individuality is this construction we make out of memory and experiences that we've had, and we create a story of ourselves, that there really isn't an individual, that it's just a construction. That's actually a common theme in neuroscience today. So much so that in a NOVA episode called The Brain, part 2 of the Brain, they talk about consciousness and individuality. And the neuroscientist there says, yeah, I know, but really what we've discovered is our individuality is a construction we make out of the memories that we have and doesn't really exist. It's just an illusion. So this is actually mainstream science at this point, that individualism is a construction. What isn't so mainstream science is that consciousness is universal. That's becoming more and more common. It used to be, before the scientific revolution, how we thought of things. The scientific revolution, starting with people like Newton, became, okay, everything's physical and we can predict it. It's like a billiard ball effect. Quantum mechanics kind of put an arrow in the heart of that with, oh, actually things are probabilistic, not determined. But science hasn't let go of the determinism part. They want quantum mechanics to be deterministic too. The founders of quantum mechanics saw that it wasn't. And so that is starting to shift again in the 21st century. And a lot of physicists, a lot of philosophers, a lot of neuroscientists are starting to say, there's something different going on here. And that's becoming a real theme and growing. So don't think that materialism, because science is saying materialism, is a given. It's not. And that's even changing inside science. So we are not individuals, but we are universal consciousness. That's those two statements. We have now covered you are the subject. Subjectivity is universal. Therefore, you must be universal too. We'll take up the last statement, all else is content, which is another big leap, in part 3. Thank you.